So I guess we can restart with our final part of the second roundtable, which will be started by Marc Antoine Kaeser from Swiss. And because this event is dedicated to European museums and so the European idea as well, I would like to congratulate you and Nemo for winning the European Song Contest last weekend. So, and I think in this spirit of coming up to combine and to come together in the same part and the same idea, in our case of museums, we like to continue with you on Marc Antoine. He's the director of the Laténium Archaeological Park and Museum, and Marc Antoine is professor at the University of Neuchâtel as well. A specialist in epistemology and the history of prehistoric archaeology, he has published widely on the history of scientific collections, on archaeological methods, on Central European proto-history, as well as on the issue of identity. He's board member of the Swiss Academy of Humanities and Social Science and a Swiss delegate at the Union Académique Internationale. He regularly takes part in the dialogue between science and society and advocates for a cultural articulation of art and science. Marc Antoine, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, and I'd like to thank Isabel for the invitation. I will just simply say that I'm very proud. I was very honored. At the beginning, when I received your letter, I thought it was a spam. So I won't say more, but I have to confess that among all the powerful and venerable institutions which are represented here, I have to admit that my museum, the Laténium, feels a bit like a dwarf among giants. If you consider that it operates with less than 20 full-time jobs and has around 70,000 annual visitors. However, thanks to its central position in a dense network of partnerships and collaborations, I hope to convince you today that if the Laténium is indeed a small dwarf, it is nonetheless a very muscular one. As witnessed by its general reputation, as it's having been awarded as the Museum of the Year by the Council of Europe and the Prize of Archaeological Outreach by the International Union of Prehistory. Now, as far as awards are concerned, I may point out that the museum was one of the first public buildings in Switzerland to comply with the new Minergie environmental standard, and that the museum was a pioneer in French-speaking Switzerland in welcoming visitors with all sorts of disabilities under the inclusive culture label. The name of the museum derives from the nearby site of Laténium, which enabled the archaeological characterization of the Celtic civilization of the Second European Iron Age. But even if we are quite proud of this particular collection, we are clearly not a site museum. The Laténium deals with the entirety of regional archaeology, extending from the Middle Paleolithic to modern times, even with a particular focus on the Neolithic and Bronze Age pile dwellings around the Alps, a series site extending in France, Germany, Italy, Slovenia, Austria, and Switzerland, which is now registered as UNESCO World Heritage, and for which the Laténium serves as the main interpretation center. The location of the museum is here in western Switzerland, on the shores of the Lake Neuchâtel. It is a state museum of the Republic of Neuchâtel, which in federalist Switzerland is absolutely independent on cultural matters such as heritage preservation and archaeological research. Legally, the Laténium is in charge of all the archaeological finds made on this very small territory of 800 square kilometers since the first heritage regulations as early as the 1860s. No matter how small the territory, The Laténium is also, I think, the main archaeology museum in Switzerland. And obviously, its creation represented a major financial effort for the state of Neuchâtel, where, I dare say, archaeology seems to be considered as a priority in culture and education. And in my view, this high level of public recognition is best explained by the regional history of archaeological research. As a matter of fact, while Neuchâtel was already recognized since the beginning of the 19th century as a scientific center of excellence in the field of geology, it experienced a fantastic boom in archaeological research starting in the second half of the 19th century, which had been fostered by massive discoveries of pile dwellings and their exceptionally well-preserved remains of daily life in recent prehistory. This may explain why the International Congress of Prehistory, which has been already alluded to by Rosemarie, was indeed founded the year before in Neuchâtel in 1866. It also accounts for the scientific relevance of our collections, especially for pre- and protohistoric times. So many archaeological sites in the region still serve as typological references on the national or even on an international level. Now, since the 1848 revolution and the establishment of democracy in Neuchâtel, which was previously a Prussian property of the Prussian king, so it changed in 1848, thanks to the development of a very dense network of well-intentioned amateurs, the huge majority of archaeological findings in the region have reached our museum. On a scientific level, the official bodies of archaeology have thus been able to process a considerable density of knowledge about the archaeological substance in this small region. More recently, the construction of the A5 motorway on the shores of Lake Neuchâtel, which started in the 1960s, have led to a long stream of rescue excavations which could be financed with the political support that the local popularity of archaeology implied. Actually, on this linear layout of 30 kilometers only, the fundings have amounted to some extravagant 200 million euro for archaeological research. This allowed the pioneering development of a true local preventive archaeology long before the Valletta Convention, la Convention de Malte, of 1992. As you might expect, the quantity of workforce to be recruited for these huge excavations was not available in Switzerland. We had not enough archaeologists to employ. So we hired lots of people from abroad, from France, from Germany, Poland, the USA, etc. And the mingling together of all those people with different approaches, with different scientific backgrounds, clearly had some organizational drawbacks, but it also encouraged the development of innovative perspective, which in turn represent today for the research undertaken by our colleagues of the Archaeological Service, who operate now with much less fundings. It is an advantage because they can base on the know-how and the considerable experience accumulated during the last decades of the 20th century. Now, let me turn to the description of the museum, which is the transformation of an old Musée Cantonal d'Archéologie, which was in the city center, into its present shape, with the building of this Laténium, which opened in 2001 on the lakeshore just outside the city of Neuchâtel, on an archaeological site, or better said, on 3 archaeological sites, which were excavated in the 1980s, a late Bronze Age village, a Neolithic settlement, as well as a late Paleolithic hunting camp, which yielded the most ancient portable art in Switzerland. The museum is surrounded by a vast archaeological park, which includes the scenographic setting of displaced original monuments, as well as reconstructions, sometimes experimental, of our archaeological buildings and structures, as well as reconstitutions of various natural environments, which illustrate the evolution of the landscape from the end of the last ice age up to historic times. Now, the idyllic setting of the park on the lakeshore, facing the alpine panorama, is clearly an attraction. We are careful, therefore, to remain very discreet in the operating of this infrastructure, for we understand that for the general public, the expression of this area is its perception as a quiet space out of time. The building itself is quite vast, apart from very large repositories in the basements. The permanent exhibition covers 2,300 square meters on 2 main levels, while the temporary exhibition spaces are much smaller with 300 square meters, a reasonable surface considering the short human resources available for the design of temporary exhibitions, which we always conceive internally by our own team. The main specificity, however, lies in the fact that the museum is not only a place of exhibition, but a true scientific and administrative center. As a matter of fact, the museum also houses the Archaeological Institute of the university, of the local University of Neuchâtel, where I'm a professor, as well as the labs and the various facilities of the state bodies of heritage and archaeology, with which we are organically linked on administrative and organizational levels. Now, given the clearly centralizing archaeological legislation of the state of Neuchâtel, it must be understood, and this is quite different from other cantons in Switzerland. Given this clearly centralizing archaeological legislation, it must be understood that there is no room for any other national, local, or private competence in archaeology in our region. Even the 3 public associations promoting archaeology have their headquarters in our museum. And as a result, everything that is done in archaeology in Neuchâtel is decided within our own walls. Obviously, such a monopolistic position entails serious responsibilities in our relations to society. But the benefit of this situation is that these expectations obligatory transpire in all our activities. When you're always confronted, when you're always moving under the eye of the public, when you're constantly confronted to the questions of your fellow citizens, even when you take your break on the Café Terrace, there is no room for a refuge within the ivory tower, even for my colleagues of the academy of the university. Of course, this configuration also contributes to the self-confidence of the museum staff. Our guides, obviously, but also all the receptionists and the administrative personnel are continuously informed day by day about the progress of research and enjoy a precious familiarity not only with the results of the excavations and analysis, but also with the evolution of research issues, as well as with the grounds of archaeological enthusiasm. Now, as regards the outcome of the museum visit, it is necessary to clearly distinguish, I think, between the permanent exhibition and all the rest of the outreach activities. The so-called permanent exhibition is entitled Yesterday Between the Mediterranean and the Northern Sea. And as the title shows, the idea is to address the long-term history of what we call temperate Europe, from Paleolithic up to modern times. In fact, the scenario is based exclusively on local finds, but they are put in a continental perspective. In other words, the concept avoids everything too specific to the region and takes advantage of the referential character of our collection and their large-scale representativity. In a rather original way, the visitor's path does not follow an evolutionary development starting in prehistory. It begins in modern times, starting on an inclined slope, gradually descending, like the archaeologists, into the deepest past. Didactically, this reverse steering functions, I think, very well. As a matter of fact, the visitors begin with the material realities which are quite familiar and easy to grasp. And during their visit, they gradually accumulate knowledge and understanding and sensibility, which allow them to, when they have reached the last sections of the visit in Paleolithic times, they are best prepared to appreciate the meaning and relevance of small bone fragments and flint tools, which would otherwise remain quite arcane for the larger public. As you see, the exhibition is quite bright and colorful, with large windows providing natural light and openings to the outside park, which offers some sort of contextualization for the objects presented in the showcases. The visitor's path is not strictly linear. You are instinctively led in the right direction, but you often have the choice of the precise route you want to follow. Another characteristic of the museum is the avoidance of chronological compartmentalization. Conceptually, the concept aims at fighting the usual file drawer bias typical of archaeologists. Here, times are presented in a flow without clear-cut boundaries separating, for instance, Iron Age and Bronze Age. We consider the building itself as the representation of the continuity of time through which the visitors stroll. And given the absence of walls separating the different chronological sectors, the perspectives opening to other time periods during your visit are intended to encourage each visitor to draw his or her own connections between different pasts. In sum, the permanent exhibition is quite original in its scenographic shape and in the articulation of contents. But if the form is original in its style, in the design, I dare say it remains extremely classical, even conventional on the substance. Thus, with regular small modifications during the last 20 years, this has saved the permanent exhibition from going out of fashion, as is often the fate of some trendy creations. And fundamentally, I'd say the permanent exhibition of the Laténium truly covers all the basics expected by the public. So it's done. This is done. We can rely on the permanent exhibition. So in turn, in the design of the museum policy, these solid foundations give us the necessary safety and self-confidence in order to dedicate all the strength of our outreach activities to other, more original views on archaeology, with a special attention to its relevance and contribution to society at large. And quite frankly, I consider the permanent exhibition as a carte blanche, a wild card to museological freedom in the design of our outreach activities. As regards the temporary exhibitions, there are no limits to the possible thematics addressed, as far as we can find any way to make it relevant for our museum and our public, be it on methodological, theoretical, historical, or cultural grounds. So in the last years, we have organized exhibitions on very diverse thematics, such as Celtic art, or the symbolic value of flowers in ancient Egypt, but also on the fakes and the ethics of authenticity, on the anthropological concept of patrimonial emotions, les émotions patrimoniales, de Daniel Fabre, or on all sorts of enigmatic finds which challenge the heuristic potential of archaeological methods. And presently, we just opened an exhibition on the camps of World War II, which illustrates the potential of archaeology in shedding light onto the realities of collective confinement. Now, in these temporary exhibitions, as well as in the general outline of the whole offer of the scientific outreach and the events organized in the museum, we feel free to embrace the broadest possible transdisciplinarity and to cultivate all possible lies and connections between arts and sciences. Since I've been working previously in other museums, I dare say that in the Laténium, the situation is particularly favorable for such exchanges. Why? Well, as you know, archaeology enjoys a large popularity, but this popularity often contrasts with its relatively low level of cultural and intellectual recognition. In turn, archaeology is therefore constantly subject to the risk of instrumentalization, or at least of a patronizing exploitation of the past by the present. Now, as regards the Laténium in our small city, even in our little country, the museum enjoys a high level of prestige and scientific respectability, which puts us in a position of strength in these exchanges, a position which I think protects us against such instrumentalizations. And it is obviously an important issue because in concrete terms, we spend a lot of energy and a huge amount of time in these exchanges with artists from the visual arts, dance, cinema, photography, poetry, or music, classical or contemporary. But even if we always learn in the process of these exchanges, these investments are only entertained if we feel that in return, the archaeological approach, not just our objects or not just the realities of the past, but also the archaeological approach, our methods have a true impact on the creation of the artists. Now, to conclude, I'd like to come back to the expression bottom up in the title of my presentation. As I hope you will have gathered, the Laténium enjoys a very strong popular anchoring in this little region. Through both its collections and its institutional status, the museum is also strongly connected to the day-to-day practice of applied archaeology, from the field to the lab, to the laboratory. Now, I believe that this is this grounding in practice that gives us the necessary credibility for the enforcing of the original paths we try to develop in the museum, in our outreach activities. And besides, and from an ethical point of view, our work is governed by a quest for reflexivity, thanks to the inter- and transdisciplinary collaborations and the exchanges between arts and sciences. But our aim, the final aim, of course, is to bring to the attention of our fellow citizens the social relevance of our archaeological heritage to ensure that it is respected, preserved, and safeguarded. And before finishing, I need to speak of challenges. We have heard of many challenges. I won't come back on challenges which many museums have. I would address, some challenges which are maybe quite specific to our institution. The first concerns the storerooms. For the preventive conservation of our collections, the construction of this huge museum 20 years ago, replacing a museum which was 20 times smaller, it was a blessing in disguise. A blessing in disguise. The architects had provided for extremely vast storage facilities, allowing for an explosion in storage volume. The problem was that this feeling of having plenty of room contributed to a great deal of carelessness in l'indiscipline by our colleagues archaeologists in the management of space, so that as soon as the museum opened, it already had completely overcrowded reserves, which is all the more problematic since we daily receive new objects coming from the excavations. So 8 years ago, we launched a large project to completely recondition our collections and to put in place better controlled procedures for the progression of objects between excavation, post-excavation laboratory analysis, and formal entry into our collections. The other challenge I'd like to finish with concerns the archaeological park. You've seen some pictures. The idea is to stabilize landscape environments and ecosystems representing different periods of time since the last ice age. Obviously, this involves some deal of maintenance work for the gardener in order to maintain, for instance, an area of Paleolithic tundra into our 21st century. Now, in the course of the last years, as a result of global warming, we have come to be overwhelmed by the increasing scale of this maintenance work. And it's not just a practical problem which could be solved by increased funding. It's also become, I think, a real ethical problem, insofar as this comes into flagrant contradiction with the principles of sustainability, which are of paramount importance for our public image. So, in short, we need today to change our perspective about this park, and we need to use this challenge as an opportunity to exchange with the public about the present climate disruption and the distinction between what is presented in the park, that is Holocene, l'Holocene, and the present Anthropocene, which is outside the park. The rest of the world is Anthropocene, and the park itself, it is Holocene. Thank you for your attention.